Okay, Brian and Susie back for part three in a series. Really, this is the episode or the video that's going to wrap everything up and tie it all together. On the prior two videos, we talked about reorder point formulas, reorder quantity formula, and now we're going to be talking about formal safety stock and safety stock. Two calculations here. Really around making sure you have enough inventory. This conversation all spinning out of our emergency preparedness conversation and video from a few months ago. And so, Brian, you're going to help tie this into a bow for us with the calculations that you've provided. Obviously, everybody can tailor this a little bit. Susie, you like the bow? You're gonna tie it up in a bow with us, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian, talk about safety stock, why it's important, and then especially as it ties into that emergency preparedness to just give that kind of vision for this three-part series, and then we can dive into the formula itself.
Perfect. Yeah. So safety stock is really, it is what it is in its title. You're really keeping that extra buffer for whatever you feel is an important amount of risk on one side. I think on our side, we do consider it somewhat risk. You don't want to keep too much because that inventory costs money, that affects cash flow, so on and so forth. But it does give you assurance that if something happens, if there's a blip, if there's, an increase in usage, if there's a back order, a shortage, then you've got a little bit extra. So I've worked places where we kept as little as, 96 hours worth. And then during COVID, sometimes we were keeping 3 months worth of stock. And so that safety stock is an important number. And again, we've talked about it in the other video series, but know your product. That's an important thing too. What are you keeping? Is this something that you have subs easily available for? Is this a one item that you're using in your CVO or for an open heart and there's nothing else that you can use? So know those products. But formal safety stock, what you do for that one, and again, this is referenced in the document, but it's max daily usage times your max lead time. And then from that, you subtract the average daily usage by your average lead time. So unfortunately, and again, this goes back to what kind of Susie and I were talking about too, you've got to know your system. You've got to know its capabilities. You've got to know also its limitations. I found a lead order report. And again, just take the time, go through the report, see what's out there. The lead time order report is something that I actually stumbled on. It's not like somebody said, here, Brian, here's your new role as a director. Here, use this. It's going to be great. Like all of this is stuff that we've kind of had to just stumble our way through. So see what's out there. Again, I would imagine that there's probably something that you can pull from. It might not be called lead time, but maybe on a purchasing report, it shows you your average lead time, so on and so forth. So unfortunately, in the system that I use, we don't have easy access to a max lead time. Now, if I wanted to take every single PO and looked at when the PO was cut and then manually go through and see the receive date and calculate that, I could do it. But again, if you're placing an order 3 times a week times, 4 weeks, I just don't have that sort of time. So what we opted to do is kind of simplify that safety stock. And what we're using is an average daily usage and then a time period. So for instance, coming out of COVID, we found that 2 weeks worth of stock is kind of that sweet spot for a bulk of our items. Now, again, as things proceed, we're continuing to lower that, again, especially with some of the challenges that are coming out with cash flow with Change Healthcare, again, drawing down that inventory even further. But then what you're doing is you're really just looking at how many you use and then how long you want to keep. So if you think that you need to keep a week's worth, you could take your average daily usage, multiply that by 7, and that's a relatively pretty good estimate of what that safety stock level needs to be. So this is something that you need to tweak. Again, we talked about the differences between like a hospital that's out. Again, one of the hospitals that I started critical care access was out in Eastern Oregon. I mean, it was out in the middle of nowhere. We needed to keep more stock on hand. There was 2 roads that came in, I-84 and eastbound and westbound would both close for 3 to 5 days at a time. So again, there's nobody that's going to come and save you. You can't get things shipped in if both of the freeways are closed. And so that's much different than somewhere that's in a suburban or a metropolitan area that you've got easy access to things too. So again, know your product, know your location, know your distributors. And then again, you can start making your own decisions based on your I'd say appetite for risk, maybe. Susie, is that a good way to say it? How do you want to
Yeah,
roll the dice?
I think so. And you've got me thinking a lot, because we're in a similar process right now where we're really going to be proactively looking at this over the next 2 months. And I know there's some things I can do in our system as far as marking it like an ABC critical type item. But you've got me thinking now, is there some other element of information so that as I talk about my inventory value on hand, I can actually talk about why this might be a higher dollar level because it's in this category. So it's got me thinking a little bit too about that, because it's important too to be able to explain our data, right? Even if it's that I end up having a reduction this year, which is truly what I'm going for, I really want to be able to just to speak intelligently and effectively about my dollars, not just that this is what I have, but this is the percentage of A items, this is my percentage of B, this is my percentage of C. And then these are the things we've done proactively to share things amongst the market. But again, that's a lot of manual work because it's not always in the system. So I'll probably look to see if that's something I can add.
Yeah. So on that note, just real quick, someday maybe Justin and Susie, I'll show you this spreadsheet that I created that, now that I have it built, every day I just run report, and then it drops and it shows me what's low stock, what's critical, what's out of stock. It shows me what I consider ABC items, which you're talking to, Susie. But ABC items, I have it broken into two things. So it will flag me either a green, which would be an A item, a B, which would be a yellow item, or a C, a low moving item, would be red. But you got to look at it both from dollar volume, but you also have to look at it from actual unit volume. Because again, and I had this conversation with our CFO just the other day, I said, remember, a lot of the items that are coming out of general stores are low dollar, high volume items. So that's going to carry a much different thing.
Right.
I wouldn't consider, typically in like a retail environment, your A items are like, that's where you're making your profit, right? But again, an A item might be something that you classify as a very, extremely expensive, like an Impella or something like that carries, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars versus gauze. But you can't run out of that.
Right.
What's more important? It really depends. But you can't look at it in terms of volume, because again, the Impella is going to be a much smaller, but the dollar volume is going to blow the other one out of the water. And on the flip side, you've got to be looking at those A items, which are actually the higher moving critical daily use items too. So something to think about.
Well, I think it's interesting to know how many locations does that item live in, because that's part of the demand planning, right? If there's a big difference between something I carry in the warehouse that's in 3 pars compared to something in my warehouse that's in all 26 of my pars, right? So I think that's the other kind of element that I want to bring into my spreadsheet that my brain wants to create, where I can kind of have a standard of information that is going to make more sense, because it's hard for CFOs, and it's hard for even most of the folks in the C-suite to really understand what supply chain means, and that it's not as easy as ordering from Amazon.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the spreadsheets though, Brian, because I know you've done a presentation for at least one, if not a few, of the ARM chapters regionally across the country, and really talking about how to leverage Excel and some of those documents, especially in facilities and hospitals that are smaller and rural and maybe don't have as much access to technology, and how can they maximize the technology that they do have available to them. So who knows, maybe we'll do another video series on those various tools and kind of take your 1 hour presentation and break it up into a series. Definitely something for us to consider in the future. But as we wrap up today, I think this has been an important conversation, and definitely one of the more detailed and really hitting home practical application of some principles and formulas for the audience that's been tuning in. So just want to thank you for putting this together, Brian, and Susie, for your color commentary as well, and insights from your day-to-day work on the front lines. Thank you both so much.
You're welcome. I want to see that spreadsheet, Brian. I'm scheduling a Teams meeting with you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you both.